And now the awkward silence as we wait for you to.
You hear the sound of
Chatting.
typing as Alex gets us off on the rest of the web.
How do we get this going?
I keep hearing a squeaky chair, which sounds like a chicken, and an echo.
Somebody's got speakers open. Must be Alex.
Okay, bye guys. Oh, I'm going to hand it to Mickey. Hold on. No, it's not me because I can hear the echo.
Brian, I think it's you.
All right, there we go. Bye guys.
See you, Alex. Hugh Forrest said it's a go on coming on the second hour. Okay. So he just wants to know, when do you want him?
Okay, we'll find it. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Well, for everybody who's just joining us on YouTube, welcome to Office Hours. For those of you who might be stumbling in for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here. The way this generally works, every day from 6 a.m. Pacific time to about 9, we have our conversation about all things having to do with production and the internets and putting content on the internet. And this is an international show. We span the world from London to Manila to South Africa to every place in between. So basically it's tech education kind of for the work from home era. And we hope you enjoy what you see today. We start every morning at 6 o'clock with a general chat. And then if you'd like to become part of the people you see on the panel here who are going to be answering questions all throughout the course of the show, all you have to do is show up early about 6 o'clock, raise your Zoom hand. That's the one in the interface at the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you have good audio and good video and appear, we will bring you in, and hopefully you enjoy the experience and stay and contribute to everything. Then about 6:45, we send out the Discord link. We were a little late today, but the Discord link is where we do our chatting for the rest of the day after the show is actually over. And there are people there, hundreds and hundreds of people who do this same discussion 24/7, basically. So that happens about the time we do the mic checks. If you were here a little earlier, you saw, probably not on YouTube, but in the show itself, that everybody goes through a mic check because we're really interested in making sure that everybody watching the show can hear what's being said clearly. At 7 a.m., the show starts most days, and we go live on YouTube, and that's probably why you're watching this. The key to office hours is the show is driven by the attendees. And that means that we open up a chat window, and it's not the normal one you see at the bottom of your screen. If you're used to doing Zooms with your friends and things like that, the chat at the bottom we do not use. It does, however, have a link to the Mukana chat, which is the system we use to drive the show through these questions. So you not only can post your own questions, but equally as important as you can vote up questions that you think should be dealt with. The questions that get the most votes, we start with earlier, and we spend the most time talking about. So you really drive the content of the show, the topics talked about, and how long and in how much depth they are talked about. That's the overview. Now I think it's time that we dive into the questions. So is it Guy? Guy, are you doing questions today?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'll start off with Jonas. It says, what do you think of the new video SDK from Zoom? Does it make sense to build your own client with that? Note some features: raw video / audio access, HD video, customizable video composition, up to 300 co-hosts / participants per session.
It's a lot of changes. Zoom's been very, very active with pushing new features and new updates to Zoom all the time. So who here has had any experience using the new things, particularly the video development kit, the software development kit that's mentioned there? Anybody have any experience at all? No? Well, it's going to be one of those moments. I haven't used it either. I'm not a programmer and I don't dive into that stuff. It looks to me like they're going hard and heavy. And I think Alex has always said, and I agree with him, that Zoom is, as a product, is way out in front of its competition in a lot of areas. This is certainly one of them. So unless somebody else has something to pop in on, Chris Fenwick is going to take a shot at it. Go ahead, Chris. Oops, you're muted, double muted. You have something in the way of your signal.
Could I possibly have? So, did I hear that right? The new SDK gives access to clean feeds. Is that what I heard? I wish Grant hadn't left.
We've been talking about clean feeds for a long time, and basically that just means that a lot of people who are using Zoom and want to put it on their websites or something else as a portal, the fact that Zoom has some stuff around the edges, little icons in the corner, a lot of people don't want that. So they want a clean feed, which is basically just the video with nothing else overlaid on top of it so that they can use it for clients and things like that. Stuart, go ahead.
If that's true, Skype is dead. That's it.
No, I'm not going to say that. That would be snarky. I'm not going to do the Skype. Still here? These
Snark is my job.
That's right. Well, we've seen this gigantic battle, and this really has been a change in the entire universe of streaming in just an amazingly short period of time since COVID made Zoom and these kinds of video sharing applications such a massive and important part of everybody's lives. It's really changed the landscape of what used to be broadcasting. And now the internet undoubtedly has vastly more eyeballs watching video content than the networks ever did globally. And that's a big shift. So I know Zoom is working really hard with tons of engineers to make this the best experience they can. And boy, they're developing fast. Anybody else have any ideas, or do we need to move on to the next question? Looks like that's all the opinions anybody wants to toss in on something they haven't played with yet. I'm sure we will be talking more and more and more about Zoom features every time they do one of these pushes and initialize new features. But maybe the day after, the couple of days after that, when people have a chance to actually use them, we'll have more discussion about them. Go ahead. Next question.
Next question is from TJ in Minnesota. Did anyone see the new Apple Fitness Plus videos? The trainers are all using headset mics. Any ideas what microphones those are?
This would be good for our second hour audio discussion today, but we can deal with it now. Nothing wrong with that. Let's do Mickey and then Greg. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I haven't seen the videos, but I just Google image searched it, and it looks like DPA 4266s.
And Mickey, are you familiar with those, and what are the aspects of them that would have led them to pick those over anything else?
The 4266 is it's a similar sound, similar capsule to the 4066 that Alex uses, but it's a more flexible and a little lighter earband.
Oh, okay. So it's just a little more, well, and I would imagine that since this is exercise and aerobics, lightweight and stable would be two very high features on the list of things that you want if people are doing high energy stuff. Greg, did you have a thought about that, or did you just... Oops, you're still muted too.
Yeah, I would have thought of 40, not seeing it, I would have thought of 4066, but Mickey did the research, so.
Yeah, okay. So I will say in general that whenever you're dealing with having to be active and still clear on any kind of microphone system, the head-worn form factor, getting a microphone near your mouth such that it doesn't change position, the mic relative to you, no matter how you move around, is always going to be your best choice. Even a lavalier down at the chest, I don't know if you've ever noticed that somebody has a lavalier here, and when they move their head to the side, the microphone doesn't move with them, and there's a little bit of an off-axis sound, even to a lavalier. So getting that on something like a head that's going to be moving around during aerobics would be a big deal. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I was wondering, Mickey, is that particular version waterproof or sweat-proof? Because I would think they would want to go with a Countryman if they're sweating up a storm or something.
As far as I know, I don't think it's water resistant. Yeah, I would think the same. Like the H6 is water resistant. But yeah, I guess they went with more for a sound signature than. They can probably spend a bit if a couple mics break.
You think Apple has a couple of bucks to be able to?
And of course, they're very fit people. They don't sweat.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they can afford 3 production assistants to do nothing but come out and dry your microphone between takes. So that would be easy. Greg, go ahead. Whoops, double mute again.
The website says it is humidity resistant.
Oh, there you go. So I guess perspiration and humidity is an equal thing, as long as it works. Moving on. Next question. Oh, no, Guy, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, in those videos, I was also checking out Pelotons, and one thing that I noted is on the back they have a little clip, which mine didn't come with on my DPA, and I know a lot of the piles and whatnot don't come with it, but that thing is important if you're going to be exercising. For anybody, take note. It's most likely an accessory that you can purchase to have proper cable management, because if you're exercising, you do not want to get caught up in that cable and have a machine rip those things out of your ears or off your head. So be careful when using these head-worn mics around fitness equipment.
Absolutely. In fact, we've talked about the fact that in the world of sound, mounting is almost as important, well, not almost as important. I mean, the sound itself is the most important factor, but there are microphones, and I think the tram lavaliers are particularly noted for that, who have all sorts of mounting options, because in the various uses, stability and just a proper mount can affect sound tremendously. We've all heard lavaliers who are misplaced that are rubbing against clothing or rubbing against beards or whatever, and it's hugely distracting. Go ahead, Chris Fritchie.
Yeah, I use gaffer's tape on my upper back. That's not sweat resistant.
Well, it's fine until you have to take it off.
Then it's great for hair removal, you know.
It can be a bit of a problem. And in fact, for those of you who want to go back to the old days, for mounting lavaliers, a lot of us from the old school learned a thing called a sticky triangle, where you take a piece of gaffer's tape and you specifically fold it into a form where you can nestle the lavalier into the sticky triangle in such a way that then you can place it inside somebody's suit or inside a blouse or a coat, and then put a piece of tape over it, and it will substantially reduce handling noise and rubbing noise if you do it correctly. So search on sticky triangle if you want to learn that old technique. Okay, I think we've pretty much taken care of that. Moving on to the next question.
Next one's coming in from Shane Foley in Ashland, Oregon. I just bought a pair of 40-watt GVM 800D bicolor RGB lights, 3200 to 5600K, with softboxes and grids. Any advice on dialing in lights like these for education and corporate live streaming? I'm particularly interested in correctly lighting skin tones and understanding how much light is enough.
That's a big question, and I think we can spend a significant amount of time on this. Softboxes and grids are great light controlling resources. Basically, most light modifiers do one of a couple of things. Either they change color temperature and things like that of lights that do not do those naturally. Those are gels, and you can sometimes use translucent material in front of a light to soften its spread and things like that. But the other big thing about softboxes is that it expands the area that is generating light. So if you take a small light source and put a big piece of diffusion in front of it, the light hits the diffusion. The diffusion actually emits the light from that point on. And it means that you get bigger sources, and bigger sources by their nature are softer sources, and softer sources are usually more flattering, particularly to those of us who are not in the bloom of youth, who have wrinkles and issues with our skin. A big soft source is your best friend. In fact, I've read contract writers where a particular news person or actress of a certain age will specify that the actual lighting gear used, because they know it's very flattering. Go ahead, Stuart. You want to dial in on this?
All of that, plus a little bit more. Yes, big soft sources. The closer it is, the softer it is. There is plenty of math for it. There's also plenty of math for the fall off of light as you go away. It's the same inverse square law that affects sound propagation. But there is a little bit extra that you might want to look at, especially if your plan is to get good skin tones. And that is the white balance of the camera must be done under the same lighting that you're projecting onto the skin. Now, I'm going to share a little graph with everyone. This is a spectrum display of different lighting sources. In the top right corner, you can see the LEDs. The bottom left corner, you can see incandescent, and the middle top, you've got daylight. Now, notice that compared to daylight, there's a lot of green missing from LED, and there's a lot more red in incandescent. That little graph is great for knowing for lights, but what a lot of people don't realize is that the sensors on your camera also has a similar response graph according to what dyes are used in the pixels and in the filter, like the Bayer filter in front of it. So some lights and some cameras don't work well together, especially some early cheap LEDs with Sony, early Sony alpha cameras. There's a whole slew of examples of where there is no light at a certain frequency that is seen by the camera from some early LED lights. So you've got to take time, make sure your lighting is right, and make sure your white balance is adjusted so that your camera can see the light coming off of the person to be able to get the skin tones right in the first place. There's an argument that some people will make about the skin tones for different colors of people. It's a little bit of BS. They're so close it's not funny, but there's a lot there you can work with.
Great. Thank you. And there's another thing. The part of his question, is there any advice on dialing in lights like these? And so one of the first things that I learned when I was learning lighting was reduce and make simpler. You want to start generally, if you want to try to make somebody look good, start with one light, your key light traditionally, and make that work correctly. In other words, don't turn on all your lights and then try fiddling with them and moving them back and forth, because there's a relationship between all these. And if you're asking yourself, how far up or down should I dial this light? You get the key light right for exposure, then often you'll add either passive fill through a bounce card or an active light for fill to bring up the second side of someone's face. So if my key light, I wish I could turn one of these off, I'll just move it out of the way. So if I have a split like this, that's going to be my key light. It's doing one half of my face, but I've got shadows off my nose and things like that. You bring in a fill light to soften those shadows and even up the exposure. And then the third light is often a rim light or a separator behind. You can see there's a small light on my hair, just providing a little bit of depth so that my hair stands out against the background. You want to get the ratio of those correct. And the only way you can really do that is kind of going through step by step and dialing them in. You will also learn, as you start learning lighting, that the position of your key light has a lot to do with the beginnings of how someone looks. So turning off everything else, working with your key light until the person you are photographing or videotaping looks as good as you can make them look. Pay attention to how shadows fall and whether they're craggy, and you're making them look more craggy or less craggy by how you put their light in front of them or to the side. All those things go into setting up a lighting pattern that works for that person in that situation. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It's also important to look at the surroundings that you're ending up lighting. If you're up on a stage with a black curtain, usually something like that, it'll be easier to light than if you're in a completely white room with natural light coming in and different things happening. Like, for instance, this microphone is casting a shadow over the side of my face, which is something that I don't really care for, but it's somewhat necessary in some of the things that I do. So I have to live to learn with it, or figure out another light source to bring to fill that in. But it's all important that the first thing to do is just to walk in the room, take a look at the surroundings of the room, and see what needs to be lit, what needs to be changed as well. I've done a couple situations where we've done room close-ups, and the person has we try to do all daylight lighting, and somebody's got an incandescent to the side, which kind of casts a yellow tint to the side of the face, and we had to move that. So things like that are what you really want to focus on room-wise.
Yeah, we're saying basically, get up a shot, look at it. I mean, get your chain in place so that your camera is feeding a monitor. The better the monitor, the more you can rely on its color accuracy and tell you what the shot's going to actually look like. And then work to make that constantly improved. Go ahead, Guy, and then Stuart.
I was wondering if anybody else wanted to jump in and talk about the flesh
Sure.
tone line.
Let's talk about vector scopes. Yeah, this is an interesting thing. On most meter packages, and we haven't said this, but we're talking about dialing things in by look and by eye, by checking a monitor. Television signals, which is where this started, and now video signals, and even on the net, these are technical specifications. And there are measurement devices, and what Guy's screen is showing right now is a vector scope, and it's one of the measurement devices. It takes the picture coming from something and breaks it into its color components. And this line that he's showing that says skin tone line is where all human skin will fall if it's properly exposed. So one of the techniques for determining if your white balance is correct is to get a shot and maybe put it in your NLE if you want to check it in your NLE, because that's where you're going to be color balancing. Crop to just the person's face so you see nothing else, because if you have everything else, you get a bunch of stuff around the skin tone. So, and you can do this on a product shot with a patch of somebody's arm. The point is to reduce the screen until you just see the flesh tone, and then bring up the vector scope, look at how that line is aligning with that little vertical, which is the skin tone line that Guy showed earlier. And you can adjust your color balance until that fits as close as possible to directly on that line. It's a pretty amazing thing, because I remember talking to somebody from Technicolor decades ago, and I said, does it matter the skin tones of the person? Would a deep-skinned African-American read differently? And he told me, no, it's not actually reading the tone of skin, it's reading the tone of blood. And all blood is exactly the same color, regardless of how much luminance the skin is kicking off, which will of course be different for somebody who's very light skinned versus somebody who's very dark skinned, but the color is exactly the same. So if you get that correct, it will always be, there you go. Guy has a perfect example of it. It'll always be on that line. It's reproducible. It is solid. It will never change. So that's the technical way to make sure that your white balance, particularly for skin, is correct. And actually, you can use this if your lighting is a little mixed. If you have light that has too much green in it, it'll throw that line off. If you can still do that same process of reducing your field of view to just the human skin, it'll tell you that you've got some light in there that is throwing off what would normally be the correct color balance. Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, two quick things. One was the point I was leading up to before, because I caught what I thought was a wind up from Mickey, which might have been just him waving his pen. And the point I was going to make about the spectrum of the cameras and the lights is that you can alter and affect that with the filters you put in front of the lens. So if you've got too much blue light, you can cut it with a UV filter. If you've got too much red light, you can cut it with an infrared filter. So there's that. The other thing is, for the scope that Guy just displayed and Bill was talking about, the adjustment to rotate the colors within that is the hue adjustment. That will actually shift and rotate the skin line or skin tone line to the point where you want it. And that can be found in pretty much all broadcast gear.
If you haven't done much of this before, there are quite a few tutorials on YouTube and other video content distribution networks that will walk you through the process of using a vector scope to establish good color. Highly recommend that you study up a little bit on that stuff, because you'll be using it for the rest of your life if you shoot. Anybody else? Let's see, I got knocked back from gallery. I don't see any other hands in the panel. So hopefully we've given you some suggestions. We are running low on questions in the regular recent. I'm very happy to see that second hour, we have quite a few questions already in the queue for that. But if you have any general questions that you've always been interested in asking the panel in office hours, this is a really good time to do it as Guy moves on to the next question.
Next one's coming in from Stuart on the panel. He asked, does it influence the output to everyone if one person does not have the use stereo audio option checked?
Do we have, you're right. We've lost our major Zoom guru. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, that option of use stereo audio only affects what you are sending out. So if you don't have that checked, you'll only be sending out in mono. If you have it checked, you'll be sending out in stereo.
Go ahead, Brian.
Just another little kind of weirdness that some friends and I sort of been working through in the last week or so is if your audio interface is showing Zoom more than 2 channels, Zoom will want to collapse that into a mono signal. So if it's three channels, it'll collapse it to mono. If it's 1 channel, it'll collapse it to mono. If it's 18 channels, it'll collapse it to mono. Zoom really wants to see an interface that's got 2 channels on it, and you can fake that with loopback and other solutions.
Okay, that helps. Well, it looks like, we do have at least one more question that has to do with general stuff before we move into the second hour audio question. So go ahead, Guy.
Brian Anderson asked, does anyone know what cameras were used to product Apple TV Plus Earth at Night in color? All I can find is high-tech, light-sensitive cameras that make nighttime look like daytime.
Well, that's a pretty large array of things. I do know that there are a lot of cameras out there that are nowadays astonishing in low light, to the point where I think I've told this story before, where I had a shoot once upon a time with when the brand new Sony A7 when it came out. I went with a group of photographers out into the desert and took a long exposure. And in the midst of an incredibly cloudy, super black night where you literally couldn't see your hand in front of your face, I was able to take a long exposure at incredibly high ISO. And when I opened up the shot later, it looked like it was just a beautiful day. I mean, the whole entire mountain range in front of me revealed itself in something that I would have thought for most of my career was utterly impossible. So these sensors are amazing. I don't know, Stuart, do you have any insight on what Earth at Night in color is all about?
Yeah, we actually discussed it last week. It's a Canon ME20 cinema camera. So that's why it shoots only in HD. And Alex did mention the difference between one that's full frame and one that's Super 35, and the price difference is massively different. But it's a 2.2 million pixel sensor with really massive photo sites on it. So that's why it's as sensitive as it is. And you can see it. The only time you actually get a clear view of the camera is in the makings of the last episode. So it's right near the end of the series.
Nice. It's amazing the technology that used to be only in the highest of high-end scientific laboratories that now have come out and is extremely affordable to everyone. Well, it looks like we've pretty much run through the rest of the questions that we had that were general. So there's nothing we can really do but head into the second hour questions, unless anybody has something that they want to pop in. Now let's dive into the first one. Go ahead.
Well, let's go ahead and jump over to audio question. The first one from Rick Combs. What is the best way to make several thousand audio files searchable online? These are speech audio files. I have heard that this is possible. AWS, Azure.
Boy, it's a big data question. You've got several thousand audio files. Greg Curdy, do you have thoughts on that?
I do, because I've just run into it. Typically you could use something like that one. Or then
SoundMiner.
I guess that was a senior moment, Bill.
SoundMiner.
I know them.
No, I recently run into a nifty little app called Meta Digger. METADIGGER. It's free, and it's kind of a fake disc catalog maker, if anybody's familiar with that app.
Oh, absolutely.
So what it does, it scans all the files on a disk and creates a catalog of it. So this is I just recently cataloged my effects library, and boy, it's fast and it's fairly complete.
It looks like it's from Sound Ideas.
Yeah, it is.
That's interesting because, we're in the realm of attaching metadata to files or mining the metadata that is already somehow attached to the files and then turning that into something that's truly useful for you to be able to find the kinds of files you want. I know that when I've been searching for old files, I save most everything I do as an AIFF file. And so I will search on just .aif and just Catalog Maker, which you mentioned, which is a super fast, super simple. You put a hard drive in, you tell Disk Catalog Maker to catalog it. It reads as much as it can the data structures of every single file on that hard drive and generates a database that you can search at that point. So if you have a search term that has been indexed like that, pulling up all the AIFF files, even from a multiple terabyte array of scanned disks, becomes really fast and really simple. Now, it won't often give you tons of information, but it will tell you all the files that meet that particular catalog. So
Yeah.
if you're doing WAV files, if you save everything as WAV and you do type in .wav, but this sounds like it would take that even to the next level. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't really clear whether he says searchable audio files and searchable. I'm not sure if these are spoken word files. If he wants to search on words within the files, then that's something else entirely.
Right.
Where they have to be, done audio to text and then entered with either that metadata or a searchable text file has to be attached to it somehow, or to to build.
There are big data systems now that will, we all know this from the captioning programs. You can put a file up on the web and it will look through the words. It will translate sound into text and make that visible captions on screen. And that's just the next door cousin to being able to search, because once you have them as text, you can search on it. It doesn't have pure accuracy, but it has a lot.
And I'm wondering if he's asking if there's some tool that Google has built or something that can just access audio files and do that on the fly for search, to search within files to find it. I don't know.
My guess is that there is, but probably we don't have it. I wonder if
otherwise, if he's talking
the realm
about
of the
metadata
NSA and stuff.
Yeah, if he's talking about metadata, depends on the type of file. MP3s store metadata in ID3 tags, and if your files were created in something that created ID3 tags, then you can search on the data in those. If not, WAV files do have metadata attached to them, and there's lots of programs out there that can harvest that metadata, even some I wrote. But but that's one way. If they're broadcast WAV files, there are several applications out there that can harvest the scene take or any other information that's stored in the metadata in the data chunk of the broadcast WAV files. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through and enter that metadata, which you can use SoundMiner or any of the ID3 tag editors if they're in MP3 format to edit those, and then those big databases will be able to search based on the tags or the metadata chunks.
And this goes back to what I've talked about a couple of times, I think, on the show, which is managing metadata and particularly preserving it from the field through your workflow is something that I started learning about 10 years ago when my friend Phil Hodgetts was talking to me about what metadata meant as I was adopting Final Cut 10 and learning the power of metadata in a video editing workflow. And Phil helped me understand the different types of metadata, some that's camera metadata that comes in, other things that you as an individual user apply, so your keywords and things. That is the new world we live in. And if it gets to the other end, these big services and global data repositories can only index and let you search on either what has been auto-generated to be a part of the metadata schema of the files that are being uploaded, or metadata that you have actually gone in to do because you want it to be something you can search on later. Go ahead, Brian, and then Stuart. Brian, go ahead.
With that many audio files, if you have them in a content management system of some kind, and you have, let's say, a transcription to speed your search up, you're going to want to look at something like Elasticsearch or Apache Solr. The searching will be much faster, and you can also do things like faceted searches to maybe get those ID3 tags or some of that other metadata and be able to filter down as if you were on Amazon and checking, I want a light bulb with this kind of a base, or an A battery versus a AA battery.
Okay, Stuart, then Paul.
Yeah, just file under, say the name of the devil and he shall appear. If anyone from the NSA is watching, this sounds like a tool you might have. Join the panel and help us find out the answer for this.
Good luck with that. Paul, did you have something you wanted to comment? Whoops.
Me? Are you talking to me?
Yeah, didn't you have your hand raised?
Oh, inadvertently, I may have had it
Okay,
raised.
never mind.
Sorry.
Then that's fine.
I'll try the next question.
Yeah, well, we'll get there in just a second. Yeah, this is a big field of trying to figure out how, I will say just this last thing. I have learned that when I made my transition and started working heavily in metadata for search inside Final Cut Pro 10, the files that I have, the video clips that are stored from before that era, are less valuable to me now than everything I've done since then, because I have all the pieces of the original takes now indexed as I've been keywording them for close to 10 years now. So the ability to go back and search out and find an individual clip from a piece of work that I did 5 years ago has made those, hey, can we go back and fix that file we did 2 years ago? It's turned that into 10 minutes instead of 2.5 hours. And that's kind of the power. The more you train yourself to be consistent and think through what's going to work for you in terms of tagging and applying metadata to the files I'm generating from this point on, I think the easier your life gets as you go along. That's been my experience anyway. Guy, next question.
Next question comes from me. What camera are you using now, and what model might be next?
That's an exciting question. For me, I'm using a Blackmagic 6K now. However, since I use it for office hours, it drives me nuts when I have to take it out to go shoot something and then put it back in my daily use world. I will say that I've been astonished when I have taken it out to shoot at the unbelievable advances these new cameras have made over the stuff that I learned on in my career, and that I worked sometimes for years to be able to afford to buy. The fact that you can buy now a camera that works in 6K and soon 8K and and has a good picture and a solid workflow for under $3,000, where before my first high 8 shoulder mounted camera when I was just getting started, I think cost me $14,000 or $15,000. And it was a big stretch to get it so that I could do just basic corporate work. This has changed entirely in the 15 or 20 years since I did that. Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm just wondering if the question is which camera are you using now to stream with, or which camera are you using now for the majority of your work? So to answer both, that is a 10 to 15-year-old JVC HD camera with 3-chip sensors. And that is an AJA Scion, and if I was buying a new camera, it'd probably only be the Blackmagic 12K.
Jeffrey?
For me, I'm using the Sony Handycam. This is the FDR AX700. The interesting thing about it is I bought this 2 years ago, something like that, and now it's still the highest end Handycam that Sony has to offer. They haven't done any updates, which is really interesting because this only does 30 frames a second 4K, and I know that there are cameras out there that do 60 frames in 4K. So I'm not sure exactly what Sony's planning, if they're even going to create another one in this line or move on to a different type of line.
Paul Wallace?
Yeah, I'm using the oldest camera in my set of cameras, and I have way more cameras than microphones. And this is a Logitech 9000, and for some reason there's a blue line up and down them, kind of some blue lines. I'm not sure what those are caused by. Maybe the reflected light behind me. The camera I really like using is the ZV-1 Sony, man. That is an awesome camera. I like it better than my Panasonic or my Sony A series. It's really a great camera, really versatile, really fun to use.
Courtney?
Yeah, those blue lines are from the CCD sensors in that old camera. I'm using an MKOS, MKOSE, whatever it's called, camera with a cheesy lens, a cheesy little C-mount lens on it. And Jeffrey's signal, I don't know, Jeffrey, it's your camera, it's probably your connection, but you're extremely low res right now, so we couldn't really relish in the grandeur of that camera.
Really interesting.
Brian Anderson?
So this is a Panasonic HVX 250, and soon I will be shooting on a Blackmagic 6K. I have it, but it's not all set up yet.
Brian Maddox.
So since everybody's chiming in, so I use a Canon T3i, which is a pretty old DSLR with a 35 millimeter prime lens, and using Canon's EOS utility that enables you to basically turn it into a webcam. So it's a pretty inexpensive solution for a pretty decent looking image.
Okay, we've gotten a wide variety here. I actually wanted to turn this back on Guy a little bit because in your other life, you deal with a lot of equipment and things. What do you see as being the more popular ones in the, I'd say maybe in three ranges, in basic webcam type things, in less expensive, what would have been the handy cam thing in the past, and then up in the more professional ranges? What are you seeing out there in terms of the market? What are they asking you for?
The most popular is the Blackmagic 4K and 6K in that $1,200 range up to the 2,000. And, you know, originally when the 6K came out, it was 2,500. And so the $500 price point made some people jump, especially those that already had EF glass. Above that, we have a 12K sitting on the shelf, and I've been tempted every day walking by it to open it up. And so finally I just asked Blackmagic if they were loaning them out again, because for a while there, they weren't loaning anything out. So I have one coming this week, and maybe I'll pop it on the show and we'll see.
That'll be
we
fun.
can do a little Q&A on the 12K.
You need to put up a little thing that says in 12K, which it really won't be, because by the time Zoom gets a signal down.
Yeah, I have a mannequin in the studio. Maybe I'll pop it in from the studio next week and we'll see how that goes. But in the $500 range, I don't really have much to recommend. I'm using a $700 camera, which is a Panasonic G100. It comes with a little tiny lens, but I replaced the lens with a Olympus 12-40, which is a 2.8 lens. That's funny when the lens costs more than the camera, but it gives that additional stop for lower light at the 2.8, because the other lens that comes with it is a 3.5. The huddle cams have been popular, and then iPhones. I mean, just the clarity of the iPhone is surprisingly great. I mean, it's amazing actually. And then yesterday I stood at the local Best Buy and just watched 8K footage for like 10 minutes looping. I don't know if any of you have done that yet, but man, the 8K footage on the demo reels is astonishing. And it's not just the sensor of the camera, it's the glass. So one of the things that I'll be testing out is some crazy glass. So if I do pop on the show, it'll be with this Fujinon 20-120 4K. This is a beast of a lens. So
you even want to mention the price point for that thing?
13,000.
13,000. So
it's a cabrio lens.
It's a lens or a decent used car for your kid going to college. One of the two. You can't have both, but you can.
Well, the next model up is the Premista, and it's 40 grand. So you get way into those really expensive cameras.
Guy, is that Super 35? That lens?
This one is Super 35. Yeah. Yeah, it's not full frame.
It's only 15 Alex's. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right, moving questions. I think we're ready to get to the next one.
All right, next one's coming in from our own Brian Maddox. Panelists, I need a NAS that starts small, 6 to 10 terabytes, but can be expanded later. I don't really want to spend $1,000 right now. Suggestions?
Stuart, you look like you're ready to dive in on this.
Yeah, for the budget end, Brian, do you have a spare PC? If so, freenas.org, I think it is. I'll just quickly look that up. Freenas.org has an operating system that's based on, I think it's BSD, so it's effectively Unix based, and you can run it on anything from a Pentium 3 upwards. So if you've got a spare second computer that you can put some hard drives in, that'll get you started. But from there, for dedicated NASs with like backup drives and what have you, the price goes up very quickly.
Mickey and then Brian. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would probably look at the Synology DS418, I believe. Wait, let me quickly search that. DS418. Yeah, DS418. It's a 4-bay NAS from Synology. Their software is pretty robust. They have a lot of features, like say you can access your NAS remotely without having to do static IP address and all that. But I would suggest save up a bit more and get at least a 5-bay NAS so you can do 2-disk redundancy instead of, because if you do dual redundancy on a 4-bay, you lose half of your drives.
Nice. Good advice, Brian, and then John Preto.
People have really strong opinions about this, but I do like the Drobos simply because you can pop a drive of any kind, any size into it, mix and match, and it just works. I've managed larger arrays on XSANs, and so I understand what a really proper array and RAID looks like. But for home, for me, I love it. It's easy.
Nice. Okay, John Preto.
So Colin, Fenwick, Felipe, and I are all running on the QNAP very successfully for years and years.
And would you explain a little more about why that particular or that schema is QNAP just a standard NAS, or is it are there flavors, and what should people be looking for if they're coming to it for the first time? Brian may know a lot about this because of his high level audio skills, but there are a lot of people watching who probably have never understood why a NAS, network attached storage system, is a big deal for people moving up.
That's a whole second hour question.
Explain the universe in 25 words or less and why.
We use the answer is 42.
42. Thank you. I appreciate it. No, just in general, just real quick, why network attached storage?
We use network attached storage generally in a small office to share files, and you have granular ability. It's like the predecessor to Dropbox and Drive, right? So you've got storage available to everybody that's on the network, and then you can refine what accessibility they have to specific files. And if you design it right, you can create them so they're specifically designed for very, very fast write and read access as well. So there's lots of advantages for using a network attached storage.
Great. Stuart, and then Jeffrey.
Okay, just to be clear, this is my own opinion from my own experiences. It does not reflect the panel. Do not buy D-Link branded NAS. I've had them kill hard drives left, right, and center. So, yeah, personal experience.
Okay, Jeffrey?
There's two types of NASs to add to John Preto's comment there. The first one is, it's really the question, is it just you or is it a group of people that is accessing the NAS? Because that can make a difference in the price. The other thing is whatever storage you have right now, whatever you need to put on that NAS at this point in time, triple that number. At least triple that number, because that's where you're going to be in about 2 to 3 years. This is like a 5-year machine, and you'll want to have enough storage in there that can cover that 5 years. So at least triple that, and then you should be good.
Okay, let's go to Courtney and then Mickey.
No one's spoken about the speed of the interface. I guess that makes quite a bit of distance if it's gigabit or 10 gigabit or fiber. It depends on your needs, and your needs move audio or video in real time around it. I would say gigabit would be the minimum these days.
Fair enough. Mickey?
Yeah, on that topic, going back to Synology, their higher end models, the Plus models, you could add in a 10 gig card, either 10 gig Ethernet or 10 gig SFP Plus. But yeah, again, with Synology, look at also their app ecosystem. You can download and install apps to run on the NAS itself. Apps such as what do you call this, surveillance station, which allows you to hook up RTSP surveillance cameras. They also have they have a lot of apps. Look at the ecosystem. It's very what do you call this, well developed.
So it sounds like it's one of those things that network attached storage is a lot of different things for a lot of different use cases. So that would be really important in a security system for doing low res video over long periods of time and having it accessible. But that's different than a group of editors. If you have a group of editors, and a NAS is probably not the indicated solution if you're a single editor sitting at your desk and that's all you do is work with your own files, there probably isn't much advantage to moving to a NAS other than a dedicated drive, unless I'm wrong, and then people will tell me I'm wrong. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, this is more of a question than an answer. I have a tower, pretty good sized tower, an i7 tower, and I have like 5 drives in it. Are there any of the NASs, like the one, maybe the one John Preto described, that allow you to interchangeably swap the drives in your tower with your NAS?
Paul, do you want to, or John Preto, I'm sorry, do you want to pop into that, or was that you look puzzled?
There's too many variables in that, Paul. I mean, generally you buy these NASs and they're specifically designed for certain types of certified drives, right? Either that or SSDs. And so you got to be careful. And you know, there's about 18 flavors of RAID today, so you can choose from different flavors of RAID based as a balance of fault tolerance and speed, depending on your application.
Yeah, that's kind of where my mind went. And I don't know a lot about this topic, but I remember hearing over and over again that the RAID schema that you would choose to imply over your RAID array is as important as how many people are using it and what they're using it for. Go ahead, Stuart.
On top of what John was just saying, the simple answer is no, simply because most NASs used a journaled partition table style format for the drive that you see. So you would have issues pulling that out of, say, it equates to trying to put a Mac drive into a PC or a PC drive into a Mac. The format and the partition table are going to be different between the NAS and the computer you want to put it in. So even though you could physically swap them around, it still wouldn't work.
Okay, I'm going to make Guy ask the next question, although I've been hesitant.
All righty, the next question, I just pulled up a photo, so I'll pull that to match. Why was Warren Zevon so good?
Werewolves of London.
Bring lawyers, guns, and money. That's all I can say.
There you go. We our brand is that you ask the questions, we answer them. So does anybody a major Warren Zevon fan? I mean, a lot of people like me know of him and have admired pieces of his work, but I don't know his catalog deeply. So do we have any serious Warren Zevon musicologists in the group? And if not, we're going to leave it to those of you who are on the Mukana chat to start a thread and take it as far as you would like down the rabbit hole of this particular artist. Stuart, you have a note?
Yeah, I would say Jeff Lynne is a better songwriter.
Oh, God. Now, again, we do not talk religion here. Go ahead, Jeffrey Powers.
I actually met Warren. I worked at a local theater here
Nice.
back in the 90s, and I met him a couple times. And any type of conversation I had wasn't really as in-depth as like a conversation that we have, but he's always been pretty prolific in what he says, and of course, he might have been in the right place at the right time for a lot of his stuff, and the right fans project him. We played a lot of Warren Zevon in different bands that I've been in, so I like his music. It works well. It works well in mashups too. So it's just there's never really a secret sauce, a special secret sauce that anybody can pin down to say why somebody is over more than the other person. So I wish I had a better answer, but he was a great guy.
It's nice that you met him, and I'm glad for you to report that he was a nice guy. You know, it's sometimes the pressure on artists, particularly touring artists. I think some of those crazy stories we hear about take out everything but the purple M&Ms and or the red ones or green ones or whatever. Part of that I think ends up being, well, I've heard contract writer things to see if people are paying attention, but also I think it's the pressures of being a celebrity at a particular level and just rolling through life and having people treat you weird all the time. I was actually doing a gig for Hilton Hotels near El Paso, Texas, across the border. And because I was at the Hilton, Fleetwood Mac came by and they stayed at the hotel the night before their concert. And the next day I was hanging around the lobby getting some stuff of my own done when Lindsay Buckingham came through. And I noted that it was odd because he was just going to all the service personnel and thanking them for whatever little thing they had done. And I thought, what a nice gesture. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you would expect somebody at that level of rock stardom, touring at Fleetwood Mac during the biggest part of their career, would easily let slide. And I think that level of fame sometimes reveals as much about characters as anything else. So I was glad you told a story that Warren was a nice guy and everything. I like to hear those stories because we'll always get the stories of stars behaving badly. There is a whole industry built around doing nothing but promoting that. Go ahead, Greg.
I can tell you about Green Day, that's for sure.
Well,
somebody will now ask you about that on another day. Go ahead, Greg.
You know, apparently he spent a lot of time, doing some commercial writing and spent some time as a session player, not particularly, well received. And I guess he moved to Spain. And when he came back from Spain in '75, he moved in with Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham.
Oh, Warren Zevon did?
Yes. So when that happened, and Fleetwood Mac was getting really hot then, and they all hung around. Everybody hung around together, at the same time. Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt, Bonnie Raitt, they were all in this, Topanga Canyon clique.
There was a movie I saw just the other day. There was a little one about Topanga Canyon. It was something weird buried on Netflix in the music section, and I watched it, and it was real interesting.
It's Laurel Canyon, not Topanga Canyon.
Laurel Canyon? Oh, that's right. It was Laurel Canyon, because I remember. But it was interesting. They talked about exactly the same thing, that some of the, the Eagles and other people, before the band was a band, it was the fact that they had physical proximity and they would all just hang out together. And that out of that came Crosby, Stills and Nash and some of these groups that went on to huge commercial success.
Yeah, and so basically, a lot of these guys played on some of his first, Lawyers, Guns, and Money had Mick Fleetwood and John McVie on it.
Ah, interesting.
So, they helped each other, and I think that helped him quite a bit.
So the moral of that story may be pay attention to who you know, regardless of whether they're big or not. You never know who's going to find the magic ticket. And
absolutely.
Yeah. Remember Jesse, who used to be on our panel? He lives in one of those canyons and knows all about that scene. You know who I'm talking about? Jesse in Los Angeles. Courtney knows.
Courtney knows, but I don't. Okay, moving along. Roscoe Jones has the next question. Go ahead, Guy.
All right, the next one from Roscoe. Guy and Stuart, what NAS or other storage are you looking at for 12K footage? So the one that's under my desk right now, and I have a matching one at the office, ×2, is a G-Tech Studio 32 terabyte, and it's the one with a six bay. So it has 6 drives for spinning disk for redundancy, and that's what I'm using right now.
And so remember that as we move up in sensor resolution, 12K is not just twice as big in terms of files as 6K. That's kind of a logarithmic progression. And unless there's some compression applied there, our files are going to get big, and the data streams we have to deal with in our editors are getting consistently bigger and bigger. So, I would think that in these days, a local attached storage system is an important thing to give serious thought to, because if you want to keep your files going, they're going to get nothing but bigger over time. Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm going to stick with big ones because you're going to need a lot of space. Yeah. But just a small point, long-term storage is not what a NAS is for. That's 3 devices stored separately, shipped separately, same as moving footage from location to wherever the editor, the director, and the cinematographer are. But yeah, a NAS is great for short-term attached to the editing system, but not long-term storage, not permanent storage in any way.
Yeah, plus we're seeing this move towards some files in the cloud, but obviously the bigger that your footage is in terms of just data size, the more difficult it is to have it live in the cloud, the longer it takes to get it up there, and then longer it takes to get it down. So proxy workflows that allow you to work with a smaller resolution avatar for the files up in the cloud so that you can deal with things on laptops driving around, and also just on your regular desktop, and then conform back to the full resolution at the end of a process is a process I don't think it's going to be going away. I don't see 12K in the cloud happening very fast unless somebody makes some gigantic leap in storage capacity, speed, and attachability. All right, I think we've managed to get to as close as we can to the top of the hour, which means we are now fully in the audio section. Thank you all who have tagged second hour files, and we have quite a few of them. So, Guy, let's dive in.
All right, the first one to kick off the audio section is George in St. Louis. He says, any way to access the mic pre's in a vintage Digi 002 rack and audio interface that were upgraded by Blackline Audio in Chicago? I have Logic Pro 10 on an i7 iMac Retina 5K late 2015 on Mojave with a Thunderbolt 2 Firewire adapter connect, or is it a boat anchor?
Boy, that's a tough question. I'm going to dive to Mickey in a moment, but I'm just going to say there are emulations now. And I just wanted to ask in general, as we dive into this, for those of you who are pros, are the emulations, when you see this is an old LA2A emulation, or this is a DBX 160 emulation, do you consider those to be accurate and good? Or is there still there's a magic in the hardware that we can't recover? I'd like opinions. Mickey, Greg, anybody?
I think there's still some magic in the hardware, but at the same time, a lot of the software items, especially by the big companies, are very, very close. I mean, they spend a lot of money, trying to figure this out and get it as close as they can, so that you can stay in one environment. That the hardware things are nice, but there's a lot of stuff that you also need. If you're going to utilize any of this hardware, you got to have patch bays, you have to be able to get in and out of this stuff. So, I think, yes. For instance, as far as I know, still today, there is no better pitch shifter than a Lexicon 2400. And you just cannot match that in software. So, there are certain things that I think are like that.
There used to be a thing that even old electronics, you have to recap them because the capacitors get bad over time. So even some of the hardware units that can't be, are they still reclaimable, or once they go bad and you have to fix them, do you lose it? I mean,
no, I don't see any reason why you can't refurb some of the old electronics. Now, a Digi 002, on the other hand, I certainly don't think that's worth even looking at. I mean, no, honestly, Mickey, go ahead. Preach it, brother.
Going back to the 002, DigiDesign doesn't exist anymore. It was bought by Avid, and Avid's pretty much said, bye Digi stuff. Here's our new Avid stuff. You could probably, if you buy another interface with ADAT out, you can probably run the 002 on standalone mode and use the ADAT out. But I think you can essentially only get 2 channels by doing that. I'm not sure, I haven't tried it, but you would still need a new interface if you want to do it that way.
Victor, then we'll come back to Greg.
Well, these guys, I'm sure, will tell me if I'm all wet, but I have a similar situation where I want to use my Apollo preamps, which I really like, and I want to interface them into my workflow with the X32. So I bought a Dante Avio 2-channel input card, which will let me do exactly that. I can go out of that analog piece of hardware and bring it into the Dante world. And I think that could be a solution if you want to use that piece of gear.
Greg?
Yeah, certainly, Victor. But the difference between the Apollo pre's and the pre's that are in the Digi 002 are like miles apart. So if you're trying to use the Digi 002 for the mic pre's, and that's all you want it for, I would say you'd have a much better time just buying. There's so many, dual channel mic pre's out there of great quality. That I don't know. To me, it wouldn't be worth it.
It was just an example that I wanted to provide, that there is a way to take old analog gear and turn it into a digital workflow.
Okay, Brian Anderson, and then Mickey to close.
Yeah, I got rid of my Digi 002 a while ago. I gave up, and it wasn't worth the effort. But to Mickey's point earlier about using something like an ADAT interface or light pipe, I have an old Mo2 interface where the screen went dark and I couldn't see it anymore, but I could get in there and flip it into that mode, and it's just gives me another 8 inputs to my Traveler. So that'd be one thing to explore with other interfaces.
Mickey.
Yeah, just to mention, who who asked the question. George mentioned that his 002 is the modded black line. I think he means Black Lion, and the modded one has much better preamps and the crap. I think Focusrite developed those preamps. I think that was originally in the 002, which sounded.
So it might be worth looking into, you're saying?
Probably.
What he says without a lot of enthusiasm, but at some point it becomes the thing, as Alex has said, that you give to your kids and take it apart and figure it out. Have fun with it. It's now the value of it. I'm not going to feel bad if you mess it up. Guy, let's go ahead to the next question.
All righty, next one comes from Jonas. What are effects to get better live stream audio to YouTube on the mix? Someone mentioned a limiter, for example.
Ooh, who wants to take on the basic parts of effects chains and talk about, we want to go down to the base level and say, what is a compressor? What is a limiter? And what are anybody of maybe Greg has been around this stuff for a long time. What would you say are the top 3 or 4 basic effects processors in this category that someone should start with when they're coming to audio for the first time, for, I guess this is spoken word audio for YouTube or the mix? Where would you start?
Well, there's three basic tools and one sub tool. The basic tools are equalization, compression, and reverb. The sub tool is limiting, which is a hard form of compression. Equalization, of course, kind of changes or modulates the frequency response that you have for for any given track. You can make it a little brighter, you can make it darker, you can remove unwanted frequencies, hums, nasty nasal sounds. EQ to me is always your first line of defense.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the various types? Because there's third octave equalizers, there are parametric equalizers. They work a little differently, but there's various approaches to applying these things to.
Yeah, it gets, in the old days of analog, well, it's not even still, analog mixers would have typically 3 or 4 EQ controls. Okay, one would be a high frequency, and it's typically some fixed frequency, 10,000, 8,000, something like that. And then it would have either a high mid, a low mid, and a low frequency. So you just think of these things as glorified bass and treble controls, because that's really what it is. And it splits the frequency spectrum into a number of slices. Okay, so if you're working with a third octave equalizer, an octave, by the way, is a doubling or a halving of frequency. So if you take an A440, for instance, 1 octave above A440 is 880. 1 octave below 440 is 220. Okay,
so those are all the note A, but as on a piano, you'd have a low A, a middle A, and an upper
exactly.
A. That's the mathematical relationship between those tones.
Yes, it's a doubling or a halving going each way. So in a third octave equalizer, you have 3 points per octave where you can make adjustments. Okay, so basically, what would it be? Let's say if you had at 100 and you're going to an octave of 200, you would have what, 130, 160,
yeah,
something like that. You chop it into thirds. If you have you could have maybe something more than that, but at any rate, those are fixed points. Now you can also have what we call parametric equalizers, where the frequency that you want to touch on or that you want to use is sweepable. Okay, so it's constantly variable. And in our modern EQ things like most of the plugins that you'll find, you'll see a graph and you'll see a waveform within that graph and various points allowing you to raise and lower the levels of those frequencies. And so now you're working within the total spectrum of low. I mean, I'll do it from your audience perspective, low down here to high up here. And you can sweep through and find frequencies that you don't like, or that, there you go. Thank you very much. So we can see there's
a really useful for things like if you've got a particularly bad whine because some motor is going bad and the whine has a relatively narrow frequency spectrum, that kind of parametric equalizer, you can dial in the frequency that is the whine and reduce it, and it'll eliminate the whine without as much touching the rest of the signal.
Correct. And on this one, for instance, that Victor's showing now, you have what's called a real-time analyzer, which is producing a graph of the strength of the various frequencies. So you can see, for instance, that as Victor raises and lowers the any of these circles, which are points, he can raise, the graph will respond. Why don't you dump that frequency, dump red all the way, Victor. And you see the music totally goes away. It's fantastic. No.
Well, the song ended. I think it had to restart.
No, but it should.
No, this is actually Greg talking. This is an EQ of you guys coming to me.
Oh, is it really?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, then perhaps maybe we should have Courtney so we get this this far left circle some action. But anyway, this is one way that you can even out or tame some things. For instance, if you have that's great. What he's activated right now is called a high pass filter. Okay, and this is a filter that allows the highs to pass.
All right, so Greg to me right now sounds like old time radio.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, then drop some of that high end too and put me in a phone. Give me a phone futz. Yeah, I'll do a low pass too. High pass, low pass.
I don't think this has a high
Oh, you don't
pass.
have a low pass? Okay. So it's kind of a misnomer because the high pass is actually a low cut. Okay, because it allows the highs to pass, but it filters out the lows.
Hey,
Similarly,
Greg, is there a reason why you would use a noise gate versus EQing or a combination therein?
Yeah, I mean, a noise gate puts a silence in between things that you don't want. I mean, personally, I don't use them. I generally have no use for them.
So I use them occasionally in breath suppression when I'm doing voiceover. So if I'm going to record a voiceover and I'm going to compress it heavily because somebody wants a really in-your-face sound, the breaths in between the phrases, act now and you can buy this. And then the next phrase, I will see all those breaths as a particular waveform shape, and you can collect, you can get them and tell a noise gate when you see this kind of signal below this level and above this level, suppress it more and get rid of it. So with a click or two, you can take out all the breaths in a long VO performance. You can also go in it, and if you want to leave subtly the breath there, you can just select them and duck them, which is another thing. But a noise gate would allow you to do that if you want.
Bill, here's my signal, Shane, and you'll see here how I used a noise gate and some other things there. So this is the microphone that I'm talking on right now, and you can see the noise gate kicking in, a little bit of compression.
I mean, it can be effective. For me, as more of a film guy, I cut the dialogue. I get rid of all those breaths.
Okay,
I get in there and
we dove into this a lot, and we have, I think this is the second hour stuff. I think this is a process of moving along. We're going to continue to talk about audio every Tuesday. And I think, we've kind of knocked this one into the ground because we've been on it for a while. 3 or 4 of us sitting after a conference for cocktails could talk about this subject for 3.5 hours straight. It's
You
really
want a quick thing on compression? Maybe Mickey wants to do that.
Mickey, you want to just touch of the course of just a couple of minutes on compression?
I'll do it if you don't want to, but if you
pressure's on. Yeah, actually, that's the next question in the line. Compression. Okay, what is compression? It is a, what do you call this? All right, let me gather my thoughts. Okay, compression. There are 3 basic parameters in compression. First one is a threshold. Second one is ratio, and actually there are 4: threshold, ratio, attack, and release. Threshold, you set a level. For example, on an analog VU meter, let's say if your threshold is set at 0 VU, and your ratio is set 2:1, that means for every dB that the level goes, or say if the level goes to +2 VU and your threshold is at 0, the level will be brought to 1 VU. So the ratio is 2:1. It will be halved above the threshold. 2 is brought down to 1. Same idea. Say if the level goes +4 dB above the threshold, it is halved if the ratio is 2:1. And with that, you are able to control the dynamics of the sounds, how quiet and loud it could get, and also since you are essentially, what you're doing is you're making the loud sounds come a bit closer to the level of the quieter sounds. You are squashing that waveform. If you think about it as a waveform, you're squashing it down, and then you can make the entire thing a little louder as well, since you're compressing the dynamics.
Yeah, and compressor
I'm
is
sure
a tool to
you
affect
guys could
dynamic
explain it
range,
better.
which is the difference between the loudest and the softest sound in a signal going through. So you add a compressor, it compresses the loud to soft ratio of a signal and evens it out across things. Yeah, again, we could spend hours and hours, but surprisingly, I look over at the screen and we have quite a few questions for our second hour here. So rather than run real long, let's continue to move along. But please come back on Tuesdays, every Tuesday from now on, and we will try to deal with some of these basic things in more depth, hopefully to help you understand the world of audio. Go ahead, Guy.
Next one comes in from Victor Cahiel out of Brookings, South Dakota. Does anyone know of an alternative to Ultimate Ears cables? Want to have a spare on hand, but they want 100 or 200 for a replacement cable. Ouch.
Brian has some thoughts on very, very, very high-end cables, don't you, Brian?
Yes, I do. So I threw my hand up on this because I've been using custom in-ears for about 15 years now. So I've been playing this game now. I don't know if this will show up, but these are my little custom in-ears. So the first thing to note, Victor, and I don't have a good shot of this connector, plus I don't really want to take mine out of these, but the connector that Ultimate Ears is using is the standard connector that almost all in-ear manufacturers use, which means almost anyone's manufacturer's wires will fit your Ultimate Ears. That little 2-pin connector that they're using is a standard connector that essentially everybody uses. Now, I use All Clear Audio is the company of in-ears I use. Full disclosure, I'm a endorser, so thank you, All Clear. But their wires are quite a bit less expensive. Now, the other caveat, though, is there's also a lot of snake oil that goes into in-ear monitor wires, and you can start going down that rabbit hole very quickly, and people will happily sell you a $2,000 in-ear monitor wire with directional, oxygen-free copper and whatever else, and convince you that or tell you that you have to burn the wire in for 100 hours or it's not going to sound good, and on and on. All of this stuff that you see in hi-fi, you will audio, you will see this in in-ear monitor wires, and it's nonsense. It's just all nonsense. At the end of the day, it's the physicality of the wire. How flexible is it? How durable is it? One of the things they don't tell you is if you get the clear wires, they turn green. The reason mine is green is because they all turn green. All of them, I don't care who makes them, they all turn green. They still work, but they turn green. So if you don't want yours to turn green, don't get the clear ones.
Is that the copper content, Brian?
It is. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And it's an oxidation process that happens. It most likely happens on the black wires too. You just can't see them. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Victor.
So the likelihood that these Shure ones will probably work just fine with these in-ears.
If it's got the same pin, I will say Shure uses for a lot of their in-ears, they use a little coaxial connector that's a different connector. Okay. So if the ones on your Ultimates are just that little 2-pin connector, it just looks like that's everybody except for Shure. I should say, Shure's universals typically use a little coaxial connector. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the Shure's use a connector called the MCXX. Yeah, it's a little coax snap-in connector. Yeah, I agree regarding the cables because I went to a bunch of audiophile places here to look at cables. Like they have like little custom-made braided whatever, and I did purchase a few of them. But yeah, because with my usage, at least like on set, I break cables a lot just because I'm literally running around with a bag and a boom pole. And yeah, after like a year and a half of trying different cables, I just went back to getting like a 6-pack of this stock Shure cable, just because it works. It's cheap and I have to replace it anyway because I break them a lot. So yeah.
I remember I used to work decades ago for a guy who ran a stereo shop, and this was just at the dawn of the monster cables era, and it was really funny. Somebody I was talking to one day in the shop, and they said, "Yeah, the bigger the better." And I thought, well, why don't you just go to AutoZone and buy some jumper cables, way bigger than monster cables, and I'm sure you will get fine sound out of it. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, the KZ universal in-ears, which are very inexpensive. They make a whole bunch of different lines, and they're a great deal. They use the same connector. So if you search for replacement cables for those, it's a $30 or $40 set of in-ears, which means that replacement cables are usually $5 or $10 or something. Those all fit as well. It's all so yeah. So that picture is the Shure coaxial.
No, this is actually the in-ear.
Oh, well then that is different. I stand corrected. So that looks more like the Shure connector. So then, yeah, then you may have to use either the, I didn't realize Ultimate had changed to that because that is a new thing. They used to use the little 2-pin one.
Yeah, what I'm hoping is that they didn't go proprietary and they're going to force me to buy their $200 cable.
Yeah, one would hope. I would compare that to a Shure cable and see, or I'll do a little bit more research for you too, Victor, and just make sure that you're not stuck with just their cable. I would hope not, because I won't go down the talking about Ultimate Ears world, but yeah, if they should not have done that because that would be bad.
Okay, let's keep moving along. Guy, next.
Next one comes in from Shane Foley in Ashland, Oregon. I've been using AKG 240s since my first morning radio job in 1989, back when the earth was still cooling. I'm looking for an upgrade. What headphones are the audio post-production folks on the panel using? Thank you.
We've talked about this a good little bit, and this is one of those things where you get used to a set of cans, and a lot of people, I am one of them, are very loyal to what they're used to. So I'm going to go to other people first. Greg Curta first, and then Mickey.
Sony MDR 7506. That is pretty much the standard for any field recording and mostly for editing. I probably would not mix on them. I generally wouldn't mix on any headphones if I can avoid it. And they're not, they're not that great for music, mostly because they are brutally honest, and they are not, it's a flat response, and they're designed to unmask all the problems that you might have in the track.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, for post production, the 7506s that Greg mentioned, they're like, little magnifying glasses. I mentioned this a couple of days ago. Like if you're cleaning up dialogue, you want to hear every single bit of noise. 7506s, but yeah, for me personally, after a while, they get a bit fatiguing, and yeah, for music, they're a bit boring, for my taste at least. But if you want to really surgically clean up stuff, 7506s.
That's exactly what I use, and I have been for about 20 years now, and it's for that same purpose. I don't find them something I want to lie down on the couch and listen to music with for a long period of time. But boy, if you're out in the field, they're also pretty efficient, which means that you don't need a lot of power to drive them to decent levels. So that's why in the field where you're using a camera and it doesn't have a huge preamp, they're also very popular for that reason. They're really extraordinarily good at doing the thing that they do, and not for everything else. So when people talk about AKGs or Sennheisers or other things, there's a lot of people who value those highly for other purposes other than just this. And this is not to say that those headphones do a fine job of field monitoring either. It's kind of what you get used to. One of the things about having used the same headphones for 15 or 20 years is that you really understand what they're telling you. I mean, after you mix a lot of projects and you hear them in your headphones, and then you see them on TV or in the theater or wherever, you start understanding how what you're hearing relates to what the audience would hear, which is kind of the gold standard of why you use them. Go ahead, Victor.
I love my Biodynamics 770 Pros. These are very comfortable. I can wear them all day. And for mixing music, I really like that they are very flat, which is what I want.
Yeah, and you will find other people, again, most of the major brands of headphones have adherence. Some people I know love Beyers and swear by them. Some people, AKGs, I've heard a lot. Sennheisers, quite a bit. I think, they all make fine products, and you can get used to them and do effective work with them. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I also have a bunch of Sennheiser HD 280s, and they work pretty well as well. And yeah, to Bill's point, the important thing is you train your ears to how the specific set of cans respond to sound, and you train yourself to know how a mix or a certain sound on those headphones would translate to different systems. Like say, if you're cutting something on phones and you're bringing it to a dub theater, you kind of have to train yourself to understand how that work you did on the headphones will translate to a different monitoring system.
Yeah, you can certainly understand that. I mean, if you're mixing at home on a set of headphones and then you're going to go watch the content you just worked on a spot of something played in a Dolby surround theater with massive subwoofers and everything, you can kind of understand why that would be a different window on your sound with all that amplification than what you heard only in your headphones. So it makes sense.
And different types of speakers as well. When you go to a cinema, it's typically horns up there for the mids and the higher mids and also the highs. So you have to know how things would sound through a horn system. And of course, like this is getting a little deep, the X curve, the Google Fletcher Munson.
There you go, because that's where office hours really helps you. I mean, we can't explain everything. We could go down these rabbit holes forever. But now the fact that you know that there is a thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve, you are now able to Google search it and increase, if you want to get into the weeds, your understanding deeply. All right, let's keep going on. Go ahead, Guy. Next one.
Next one's coming in from Victor. Audio, bought a Audinate Dante Avio 2-channel input adapter and discovered that it needs power over Ethernet. I bought a TP-Link 802.3 AF gigabit PoE injector to provide power. Should I plug that only into the Dante 2 channel or make it so that all my ports have power?
And Brian Maddox raised his hands quickly, so he must know.
I do know. And I double checked myself because I was making sure I didn't wreck myself. And according to my good friends at Audinate, currently on their website, and I thought this was true, that adapter will power over USB as well. So it can be powered from either side. So if you did plug it into a USB port and for some reason it didn't work, I would say perhaps that port didn't have enough current, like anything else you would plug into a USB device, and it might just not have enough current. But according to Audinate, it can be powered essentially off of either end. So you can power it from the USB port, or you can power it PoE from the Ethernet side.
Brian, this one doesn't have a USB port. This one is simply the Ethernet, and then the two mail.
Sorry, the analog one. Then yes, you are correct. That one does need PoE.
So my question is, do I just dedicate that adapter that I'm getting only to that device, or am I going to be okay putting it from my network coming in to my 16 port? And Mickey's like, no, don't do it. You'll wreck it. Okay, I got it. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
That was the kind of wave down you get when somebody says, I'm thinking of plugging my microphone into the wall outlet. It's that level of stop immediately. It's okay. Let's move on to the next question. Go ahead, Guy.
All right, the next one says not a question, but a note. This is from Alex. It says the post-show will not happen today due to technical issues.
Okay, so I'm sorry, at the end of the show today, you're all on your own. You have to figure out things to do.
All right.
We're going to miss the fun of the post-show. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, no kidding. Ken Jones, we set our send levels to a measured neg 24 at Mickey's meter. How does that compare to Zoom's auto adjust level when we let Zoom do the work?
And Mickey has his hand up. Go, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm really curious if anyone else has experience with this, but I've jumped into meetings with lay people, non-technical people, and just put in WLM just to see what the reading is throughout the entire show, and the different meetings range from integrated loudness, the loudness across the entire meeting. Ranged from anywhere from -21 lufs to -17 lufs. So I'm thinking maybe it's targeting -20 or -18, somewhere there for some reason. But yeah, I'd be really interested if anyone else has insight in this.
So I guess nobody here has gone through to try to suss that out. But it's just been interesting for me as somebody who's been around audio a lot of my life, how difficult it seems to be to get nailed on the audio meters and levels. I know I've done checks and I'm sure I'm correct, and I know I'm speaking at the same level or close to the same level, yet I get a ping from Mickey that, you're 2 dB too low, bring it up, or you're 2 dB too hot, bring it down. It seems like a constant little chase here, and I'm not sure why. Go ahead, Brian.
So this actually ties back a little bit to the question that we had. Your comments just now tie back to the question that we just had 3 or 4 questions ago, which is, what's the role in limiters and compression with, doing Zoom calls or doing web streaming or doing anything? And the reality is that in life, in a real normal environment, our ears have a tolerance for a very broad dynamic range. Like we someone can talk quieter and someone else can talk louder. As long as we can understand what they're saying, we can very easily tolerate a very broad range. It gets complicated as to why. It's because they're coming from different locations. Our brains can process that information. As soon as all the information is coming from one source, a little earbud or one set of speakers or whatever, our brains get worse and worse at being able to process that wide dynamic range and be able to clearly, like we start to hear, like this person's much, much quieter, this person's much, much louder. And that's where the role then of we need to limit that dynamic range. There's technical reasons as well, but some of it is psychoacoustics of when sound is all coming from one location, from a reproduced source, having that very broad dynamic range. Our brains are not, well, it's not that our brains are bad at processing it. If anything, they're perfectly good. It's just that they perceive it as, oh, I can barely hear Mickey and Bill is really loud. Whereas if the levels were identical, but they were standing in the room with me, I would be like, oh, I can hear that just fine because I turn here and I see Mickey and I turn here and I see Bill, and my brain is able to process that. So that's why we get into all of these compressing the dynamic range and making things fit into a much, much smaller window, and why we obsess on office hours about everybody getting their levels close, because if one of our participants on our panel is even, 3 or 5 dB lower than the rest, if someone's listening, just listening to the show, it's very obvious, like I can barely hear that person versus everyone else is very loud.
Now, I'm going to support that and say, even as an editor, I have cut back to the shot of the person speaking just because I know their audio is a little iffy at that moment. And I want to add the audience ability to see them form with their mouth the words that are coming out of them, because it will help them understand and decode the pure audio content. So it's even sometimes useful to make a visual decision on audio source clarity. And I think editors sometimes do that. Sometimes you can't. If it's narrative and you want to stay on the person they're talking to see the emotion, you don't have that luxury. But in corporate kind of work, we often do. And it's like, man, we need to see them say that because I didn't understand it. Moving along. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Roberto Barro in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. What is Dante, and can it be used in an X32 that has XLive and XLive card installed in it?
Who wants to explain Dante? Audio over the interweb cloud stuff. Brian, go ahead.
Me. Only me.
Please.
So there are at least a half a dozen still currently in use, multi-channel audio formats over some form of Ethernet connection. Dante has become very popular because it's designed to use a standard network architecture rather than something that's custom and proprietary. So it's designed to move digital audio, multiple channels in multiple directions using a kind of a standard network architecture. You can use an off-the-shelf switch. I'm speaking in generalities here, but you can use off-the-shelf switches and off-the-shelf kind of connections, and essentially network audio between different devices. And so that's the short version. The longer version is that it can sometimes resemble various circles of hell, depending on how you set up your Dante network. Because it's networking, and just as if any of us first started in networking years and years and years ago, just doing computer networks, and we beat our heads against a wall for hours and hours and hours trying to get the IP addresses to talk to each other and get things to align, you're in the same world. And so a lot of the same rules apply. In fact, more rules apply with regards to making sure that everything is sitting in the right IP ranges and talking to the right things and do it. That being said, I use Dante at every show I do. I'm using Dante right now in my system at my house. I use it constantly. So once it's set up, it's bulletproof. It's very, very rock solid. There's a reason why it's becoming the standard. To answer the second question shortly, in order to implement Dante on an X32, you need a Dante card, which takes that same card slot that the XLive card takes. So you can have one or you can have the other, but you can't have both.
So it is essentially the interface between audio equipment and the web as audio over IP? No, it's not. Okay, good. So clarify that.
So that's a great clarification question. So yeah, Dante by definition works on a local area network only, and does not work on Wi-Fi. It only works on a hardwired local area network only. That has to do primarily with clock issues. Everything has to be very tightly audio clocked together, which Dante's just, by its definition, the way that it's designed, it's not designed to compensate for clocking across 50 milliseconds or 150 milliseconds of internet latency. That's a completely different solution. And again, I'll say it one more time because people sometimes, still want to make this. It will not work over Wi-Fi. Like it won't even connect because Wi-Fi's latency and variable latency, makes it impossible for the clocking to work. So
that's interesting.
It's only a local network.
That really helped me understand more about it. Victor, go ahead.
Just in addition, if you go ahead and go with Dante and replace that XLive card, you're going to lose the ability to record like you've been using the XLive for, and you will also lose MIDI over USB. You will have to go to MIDI over the MIDI cables. trust me, I found this out last a month when I installed Dante, although I love it. So what my solution is now, I can simply go to my iMac Pro from the Dante network and do my recordings there, taking no more CPU cycles. Dante is magic, and I'm in love with it.
So I'm interested as a noob who doesn't understand much of this, Brian. You're saying basically it's in your four walls. It's this communications protocol for audio inside your thing, and then you're talking about attaching to somebody else who I would imagine is using Dante someplace else. There is some latency between those two hubs, if you would, and that is okay. They've figured out ways to allow a Dante system here to talk to a Dante system there and co-mingle.
Well, it depends on your definition of here and there.
Okay.
So if here is attached to there over a dedicated fiber connection, essentially we can still create a local area network. Even if that fiber connection is 5 or 10 miles long, I can still connect Dante between those two locations on a dedicated physical fiber connection point to point.
Okay.
Essentially, once you get into latencies north of 10 milliseconds, Dante just will not work. And as soon as you hit the internet, your latency and jitter and everything is going to be way, way, way north of 10 milliseconds.
Okay.
So, I mean, Audinate has done a couple of experiments with very, very limited use cases of GPS clocked things on both sides that are linked together with extremely complicated clocking, you know, over dark fiber and kinds of crazy stuff, and have made Dante work over, you know, 1,000 miles. But in the real world, that's not where we live.
That's Buck Rogers time. We're not there yet. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I learned more than I knew before. That's helpful to me. So let's continue on. Go ahead, Guy.
Next one is there a website or book recommendation for audio wiring? I have added a looping machine and want to add more, but can find details on how to chain audio from my small setup to something more like Dead Mouse 5 Studio.
Okay. And for those of you who are over 50, Dead Mouse is a DJ slash artist who used to wear a big mouse head. Even I know that because I had a son. So, but a highly respected music producer in the dance music genre and other things. And I'm just joking here. But the wiring question remains. And I know Stuart immediately raised up a book for the wiring industry standards.
And I'm putting the Amazon link for the book in it. That will teach you so much. It's ridiculous. It was written pre-digital for parts of it, but the information in it is up to date when it comes to actually making your own cables and all of that sort of stuff. So if you need to understand all the interior, just like the argument that was going on in the chat about speaker cables and microphone cables and what have you, there is an explanation of the cross-sectional area of a piece of wire in there that will explain why that whole argument was moot.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, we do get into these things, and you know, I always take marketing stuff with a grain of salt. I mean, part of the goal of many marketers is to differentiate their products from everybody else's, and sometimes that is legit, and sometimes it's just puffery. It just happens that way. Oh, Brian raised his hands when I said puffery.
Sorry. Yeah, because that's what I'm all about. I will say that when you're researching and learning about audio wiring, the principles you want to learn about is the difference between an unbalanced connection and a balanced connection. The difference between a tip sleeve 1/4 inch versus a tip ring sleeve 1/4 inch, and how those relate to balanced and unbalanced. The difference between stereo tip ring sleeve versus balanced tip ring sleeve. And so these are, especially when you're building out a studio, it sounds like you're starting from a guitar place, from a 1/4 inch connector studio place. Learning the differences between balanced and unbalanced, and the difference between tip sleeve connections and tip ring sleeve connections. And then, yes, learning the ability to make your own with solder, with hot things, melting things to other things, is just do yourself a favor Take the time and learn it. You will never regret the time that you spent learning how to make your own cables.
Stuart?
One of these days, I'm putting my soldering iron on this table with an overhead camera, and I will demonstrate.
I agree with all
Thank
that.
you, Brian. That one looks like it's well used.
I will also say there's another skill that stood me in real good stead, and it's not. It's at kind of the next level up, but it's the idea of being able to visualize audio chains and where things are so that you can figure out how can I take something out of that chain to determine if it's causing problems or not. I for my entire career, when I started hooking up stereos, I started learning that if this thing is wrong, when it goes into the next thing, it's still going to be wrong. And when it goes into the next thing, it's still going to be wrong. And I can spend an afternoon working on the last 3 gizmos and I'll never fix it because the problem was upstream of that. So signal flow and understanding how to go through and figure out where your problems likely are is one of these things. Some people like to diagram, boxes with connections between them in complex systems. Other people can intuitively just imagine it and say, oh, I know it's not there. I know it's not there and it's over there. But I found that skill, once I developed enough of it, to be something that really stood me in good stead over many, many years of the industry. All right, let's keep going. Next question.
Next one looks like a follow-up from George in St. Louis from the earlier question. He says, it was Black Lion that did the Digio to mic pre-mod. Would those be better than the mic pre's in a Mackie 1202 VLZ Pro that I'm currently using via line out to a Scarlett 18i8 as my current Zoom audio path?
So when Greg Mackey designed those early mixers, back in, gosh, what was it, the 80s? I can't remember how far back it was, but they were a step, a decent, I think they were the highest quality preamps at a modest price for a consumer that anybody had ever seen. I mean, it wasn't those magical SSL main console preamps that people loved the sound of, but everybody loved them for quite a while. And it was kind of where a lot of, I think, of us got started with small mixers. Now, as Alex occasionally gets into, the preamp discussion is a discussion about making circuits that is equivalent to cooking chicken and the spice profiles you want to add to it. There is so much discussion and so much, I like the sound of this preamp, I like the sound of that preamp. And people who are at the high levels of audio reproduction, particularly I think for stereo, because I have never heard that much argument in the pros about, I changed from this preamp to that preamp and suddenly my microphone opened up like nothing I've ever seen before. I heard that a lot in the top end of people who were doing like voiceover and stuff like that, but I never really heard it among the console engineers who were working on a high-end SSL or something like that. I never heard of them ripping out their preamps to put in better preamps. So I don't know really where that is. Does anybody want to take a shot at the world of preamps and why it matters? Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, George, I would say to just do a full-on recording and maybe even post it up in the Discord for us, do an A and B and maybe even blind test it and let us make a call, help you out, use same mic, same levels, and do the Digio 02 versus the Mackie 1202. But I mean, it could be just splitting hairs, but I always find that sometimes listening to the record versus listening to it live gives you more details, and plus you can loop it back and study those details.
Mickey and then Greg.
Yeah, I haven't tried the 1202 VLZ Pro, but I just Googled it and it looked like it came from the era of when Mackie's preamps were. So I would say Black Lion's preamps would probably be a lot, at least cleaner in terms of system noise level. So yeah, I would probably, if you have a 002 laying around, probably take line out or try the ADAT out going into your Focusrite interface.
Brian?
Yeah, I just want to know if that sound that Mickey just made is the sound that comes out of those preamps.
Yeah, pretty much.
And/or how to spell it, and is there a scale of numbers of where more is worse and less is better. Like it just
sounds to me like a capacitor dried out and going bad. Okay. We are moving on. Guy, next question.
Next one actually comes from me, and it's over to Brian Maddox. Can you give us a summary of the AV Educate show that you were on last night?
Ooh.
Oh, well, we were there for 2 hours. So how much time do you have? So the very short version is that a friend of mine has developed a piece of software called Remotely Possible. And the principle behind it, and I loved the way that Bill Davis described this, is it gives you the ability to mirror two Yamaha consoles over the internet so that you have the ability to, for instance, sit in Savannah, Georgia with your CL5 and move the faders. And in Canada, I've got a QL1 that is mirroring every single thing I do on my CL5, and all of the audio is being processed in Canada, could be turned around and have the mix that's coming out of it be the stream. So it's the idea of being able to sit in one location with an actual mixing console and remote control another mixing console that's actually doing the show from essentially anywhere in the world. And the software includes all of the VPN tunneling is built into it, so it's a completely inclusive system. There's a small widget called RP Tunnel that you put on the remote console side, attached to any kind of any kind of computer, a Mac or a Windows machine, or even a Raspberry Pi could be attached to the console on the far end. You attach that to the internet, and then on my end, I have a simple interface software that I can use to control the far console. And uniquely, quite literally, everything that I do on my CL5 is mirrored on the far side, up to and including things like turning the screen brightness up and down, or locking the console, or changing the contrast of the scribble strips, or it basically acts as though I was sitting in front of the console on the far end, but instead I'm controlling the console on the near end. It can work bi-directionally. So there's lots of options for this for training purposes. You can have more than one person on the far console controlling the same show, and I control half of the show and they control half of the show. There's a lot of different applications.
Do you see this as eventually, you're in Savannah, there's a crew at the house where Dua Lipa's doing a show somewhere, and you will eventually be able to not only supervise, but if that person passes out, literally mix the show?
Yes. And in fact, I've already essentially done that. And we've had a couple of other people. The software's still in beta, so we're not 100% at release yet. And when I say we, it's really Andy Broughton's software. But yes, in fact, I would take it to the other direction where I could be sitting in Savannah mixing a show that's happening in San Diego, and my backup is in San Diego and could be a maybe much less senior engineer, read cheaper, but could be a person who's sitting in front of that console. And if my internet dies or I die of a heart attack, the show will still go on because all the audio is still local to the show site. It's all still happening there. It's happening on a piece of hardware there. And, someone could, in the middle of a show, step in and likely, limp through the rest of the show fairly easily, because at that point, it's just this fader is labeled Bob, and this fader is labeled Jackie, and this fader is labeled Ed, and the director says, turn up Bob's fader, and someone can do that. Most of the, when we're doing these kinds of shows, most of the actual work is all during pre-production. It's all setting things up, getting the gain structure set, getting the compression set right, getting the EQ set right, getting all that stuff done is 95% of what you really want an experienced engineer for. And when you balance the costs of shipping engineers all over the country, which is basically what I've done for a living for the last 10 years, against leave that person where they live and just have a local person. And it becomes a very economical way to do business.
It's a fascinating part of this new work from home shift, and it's telling you that we're getting better and better capabilities, and this will be restructuring some things, I would imagine. So, I wonder if there will be new job titles that show setup engineer will be a thing, and then the board operator will be a different tier or whatever. I mean, it's just, there's so many things to think about as this work from home thing expands, and the technology, which is what we're talking about now, expands to serve the new realities of what we're going through. I think it's a fascinating time to be in any part of technology and the arts. Let's keep moving along. Or Mickey, do you have one last comment you want to make before we move on?
Yeah, just curious why. I'm sorry, was it Andy who developed it, Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious why he went through the route of controlling, say, CL5 with another CL5 instead of like another more affordable controller. Why that route as opposed to, yeah.
Two reasons. One, I was the person with the crazy idea in the first place. And so I'm the one that came to Andy, who is an actual programmer, because I couldn't write 2 lines of code and make them not crash the whole computer. And I had a CL5, and my use case in my business, CLs and QLs are the standard that everyone uses. There's also some, the CL and QL series from Yamaha are unique in the way that every thing that you do on the console generates a unique MIDI signal, and every QL and CL console will respond to that MIDI signal. So essentially what this software is doing, it's slightly more complicated than this, but essentially what this software is doing is taking that MIDI signal, packaging it in such a way that we can send it over the internet, that the other console can receive it on that side. But it's essentially, I came to Andy with the idea of, I know I can put 2 consoles right next to each other, hook up 2 MIDI cables together, and the 2 consoles mirror each other. How do I put the internet in between? And the TF series does not have the same under the hood protocol. The PM series does not have the same under the hood protocol. That being said, Andy Broughton is his full name. Andy's next level is to dive into the OSC control consoles, which will bring things like the TF series. Well, I'm not sure about the TF series, but we'll bring in like the M32, X32 series, and likely we'll bring in the PM Ravage series, because they're rolling out OSC on theirs as well. So.
Okay, we got about 3 minutes left before we hit the top of the hour. Let's see if we can get through the last 2 questions here. Go ahead, Guy.
All right, just want to say thank you, Brian, for summarizing that. I mean, guys, we're witnessing history in the making right here. I mean, Brian, you're right at the cutting edge of all this, and I appreciate you sharing that and letting everybody know what's going on, because I don't know if everybody realizes what a watershed moment that this is. It's huge that we're being able to, we're forced out of necessity, but to control things remotely and in this COVID era, it's just, it's amazing. And some people won't be flying in the future to events. This just might be out of the comfort of your own home due to work that was done now. All right, over to TJ Asher's question. What is the role of the recording engineer in an audio recording studio? Are they setting up mics or running the board? Is there a division of labor between techs in a recording studio?
Mickey, dive in.
I guess it's that time that I say it depends. Yeah, it depends on.
Saying I had to put a check mark on the calendar for today. Mickey got his. It depends.
All right. It depends on, because a lot of times now people are multitasking, and also it depends on, say, for example, if you're recording to 24-track tape, a recording engineer is on the tape machine, not on the board, not on the mics. You have a separate mix engineer, you have a separate producer. But yeah, and I'm sure Brian and Greg could expound more.
Greg has his fingers up.
I think in a big studio environment, you might have you might have second engineers who would as Mickey said, run the tape machine. B might be out on the stage adjusting mics. Certainly on a scoring stage, you would have that. There's so many, so many people. The mixer draws out a little mic plan. The A2 goes and puts up all the mics. But there are a lot of mixers that have very particular mic placements that they like. And they want to make sure that they have the mics in the right places where they want them. So they might employ a second to roughly place the mics, and then they go out and fine tune it, or they may just want to do it all themselves.
Okay,
So
we're in the last minute of the show,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure that we don't run too
That's
far.
all.
Just so that if Alex is doing something else and he wants to pop in and close it. So let's move on. Go ahead, Guy.
The next one is from Eddie Scott. Mixers, how do the controls map when it's not the same model? What?
I have a feeling that this is for me, and I don't want to take over the entire time with remotely possible software, but it's essentially a one-to-one mapping. So if I'm controlling a QL1 with a CL5, I can control everything up to channel 32 on the QL1. Anything I use on the QL5 past that doesn't move anything. So everything is just a simple one-to-one mapping. So if you are mismatching your control console versus your remote console, just whatever is not in common between those two does not get controlled between those two.
Okay, last question real quick, and this is going to be tough. So think very fast. Go ahead, Guy.
What would the panel recommend as a Christmas gift for an audio music singer / geek budget? One Alex.
One Alex. So that's a lot. I was going to
less than one Alex.
Pack of Sharpies. It's the one thing I found that is always useful. I always forget to buy. Go ahead, Mickey, then Stuart, real quick.
Sweetwater gift card. Nothing else. Like
there you go.
Like, don't even attempt to pick something for an engineer. Don't decide for them because they want to decide for themselves.
Stuart.
I hate you, Mickey. That was basically my answer.
We have
get them a gift card.
We have agreement. So gift certificate to some musician or / equipment specific thing. Brian, did you want to sneak in with the last thing before we say goodbye to everybody?
I was just disappointed. I wanted to hear it depends.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate you being a part of the Office Hours family. We hope you come back tomorrow and check out what will be here. We'll be back here tomorrow morning, same time, same place, doing the same stuff. And Stuart, what's your last hand thing? We got to get out of here.
Same rule for cinematographers, lighters, gift certificate.
Gift certificate. There you go. So almost anybody in this part of the creative arts. Thank you all for joining the show today. We'll see you all tomorrow.